Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our fourth webinar in the Back to Basics series. We're super excited to have you here. In this session, we're going to be talking all about linguistic asset management, so translation memories, style guides, glossaries, and we will be talking about, the basics, as this is the Back to Basics series, all the way up to a 201 level. What can you do, especially with AI translation in the mix? So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. One is that we will be recording this session and sending it out to everyone who registered. So if you have to step away for any reason, or you want to have a colleague shared this with, we can do that. So we'll share that after the event. And then the second thing is just we will take questions at the end. So you'll see a Q&A session or section of the site on the right side. So feel free to pop your questions for Andrew and Mari in there. So let me go ahead and introduce our two panelists and we'll get started. So Andrew Batwash is our Director of Language Services here and a frequent webinar attributor. So thanks so much for joining, Andrew.
Yeah, of course.
And then Mari is our team lead in EMEA for customer success. So Mari has a lot to share about her experience giving advice to our customers on linguistic assets. So thanks so much for joining us, Mari, as well.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Perfect. So let's get started at the very beginning, Andrew. Why are linguistic assets so important, not just to develop, but actually maintain and use?
Yeah, definitely. I think traditionally, companies have used linguistic assets to make sure that, translators have had instructions on how to, bring the company's brand voice, how do they want to communicate to, their customers, their audiences through into another language, right? And those have traditionally been done through, a glossary, terminology that's important to that customer, a style guide, instructions as the translators, and then the translation memory, which are the saved translations that are hopefully of good quality. And that's been pretty effective. And we're kind of at, I would say, maybe a shift and a change in how those instructions are structured and put together as translation production becomes more and more automated and uses more and more machine and AI to deliver the translated content. I think we'll see a change from instructions to translators to really good data inputs into these automated systems, and how those things get managed and maintained are going to evolve as well.
Yeah. So just on the mention of maintaining them, these are all live documents. As in, when you're first starting with translation, it is really important to make sure you have as good a glossary and a style guide and a TM as possible. But again, when you evolve, or as soon as you get any questions from linguists, for example, is this a do not translate term? That should make you think, ooh, this should actually be in my glossary. Likewise, if you have any feedback on a translation for, I'm not sure whether the style is right, I'd prefer it X, Y, Z way. Well, then again, you could think, okay, this is again something I should add to my style guide. So again, it is hugely important that you have as good as possible to, when you first kick off translations, to kind of get the best translations from the outset. But again, not to worry. It's a case of, you will learn what to put in each of these and how to maintain them in time.
Yes, it's a marathon, not a sprint, for sure, with the linguistic assets. So we'll talk about this in more detail as we go along. But Mari, what are some of the most common mistakes or missteps you see when customers are setting up their assets?
So first, when it comes to a glossary, or some people might call it a term base, if somebody's very new to translation, and I ask them just to kind of give an example of a glossary so I can take a look, they may actually come with full sentences. So, that's really not the idea of a glossary. Again, the idea is that you just put in your main terms there. As I mentioned before, especially your do not translate terms, any terms that might be specific to your industry with a clear definition. As we know, there can be a lot of words that might have different translations depending on the context. So the more information you can give in there, that's really important. And so that's the glossary. Style guide, it's a case of, again, as I said, this is something, you can learn to what you need to put in there. But, you need to think, okay, so who's using this document? the idea of this document is that when somebody's in translating your content, you know exactly how you want your translations to be. So you need to make sure that, you let your linguist know as well. And then when it comes to the translation memory, there may be a time that somebody has just said, oh, we just had the one translation memory without maybe thinking, have you had different content types in there? So for example, somebody may come and they may have had like some marketing content and some legal content and even a mixture of formal or informal. So it's really good to have that conversation to understand the type of TM that you're coming with, so that we can make sure we can set you up to basically separate these out to have separate translation memories for your different content types when required.
Yeah, and one thing to add here, as customers think about setting up these assets for use with your AI translation or even machine translation, right? Is really kind of thinking about what those systems are going to be able to read in terms of data. And so in Smartling, one of the things that we have available to our customers is to really define terminology, how it's used, right? Is it a verb? Is it a noun, et cetera? Those are the kinds of nuances that may not be required for a translator, right? A translator can intuit or understand that from context as they're translating. But these systems really rely on that kind of structure, and really need localization teams to feed that sort of structure into the production process.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's take each of these one by one. I think, there's the three main linguistic assets, and we'll start with translation memory, which I think people often think of as a place to potentially start. And we can talk about whether that's right or wrong as well. But let's talk through goals, what to think about, and how to maintain for each of those. So Andrew, if you could kick us off kind of with the goals of translation memory, and then Mari, maybe you can cover what we should think about when we're building our translation memory.
Yeah, thanks, Cassie. Yeah, so I think like the really two high level goals for customers when they're thinking about translation memory, it's an investment for them in cost savings and consistency and high quality reuse, right? One of the great benefits of TMS, right, translation management systems, are allows customers to get the benefit of content they've already translated, so they're not paying full price each time, every time. And that's that's one side of it. The other side of it is the high quality reuse, right? Hopefully the way that you're producing the translations and then storing them results in high quality content, right? Or I would say stored content that matches the quality level that you're looking for, right? So if you have marketing content, you may need a higher quality level and you want to store that in the translation memory, versus maybe you have some translations for documentation, and that's okay to be at a lower quality level. But you really want to be able to get the consistency in that reuse, irrespective of the quality level, and make sure that you're always kind of communicating using the same terminology, the same voice, right? You don't have that variability, and that's what that translation memory is there for, right? Is bring down cost, consistency, and make sure you can get that repeatable, those repeatable outcomes.
Yeah, so then I'm just going to also add that if you're just starting translations for the first time, that's easier. It would just be a case of creating a new translation memory, or more than one if you had different content types, for example, formal, informal, marketing, legal. However, if you come to us and you have a translation memory and you're not actually sure of the quality, there are also things that we can do. So we would always recommend that you start with a clean translation memory, that that any translations that are going to be saved into this, that you're confident of the quality. But like, rest assured, if you're like, we still spend money on our our previous translations, again, we're not sure of the quality, but we still want to leverage them, so that's no problem at all. And we can make sure that they're leveraged in your translations, but we can do certain things. So one, we can keep it separate, have it in the leverage, but we'll disable what we call smart match. Smart match is a proprietary Smartling term. It's basically more than a 100%, and it allows you to leverage strings from a translation memory that you're 100%, that you're confident of the quality, and you can actually have that string skip translation steps altogether. So that's going to save you a lot of time and money. However, just imagine if you're not confident of the quality of translations, you wouldn't want them to skip a human. So in your new clean TM, you can, if you have the same, again, more than 100% match, it can depend on variants, etc. You can have that totally skip a human, but for your imported TM, you can say, I'm going to disable smart match. And in addition to that, you can even say, even if I'm going to leverage strings from that, if it's a 100%, I really don't want a linguist thinking that's a 100% and maybe quickly scanning it and saying, oh, that looks fine. You can put a penalty on that. So for example, a 10% penalty to make that string a 90%. So the linguist is required to say, oh, okay, we don't have that exactly in my translation memory. What's wrong with it? And then they can, make it better, and then it'll save in your new TM. So again, rest assured that you can always leverage any translation memory that you have, but we'll always just make sure that it's been leveraged in the right way.
Yeah, so maybe just to recap that, determine what you're dealing with. Are you dealing with something new? Are you dealing with something you trust or something you're not sure on? And then there's a bunch of settings, I think, in Smartling for sure, but also in, other options. So you can think through what you want to do as far as routing that content based on how good you think your TM is. So Andrew, moving on a little bit to maybe that last part around making changes to translation memory. What are some options that people have to update that TM?
Yeah, and Cassie, you mentioned making sure you know what you're working with, right? And that can be a challenge, right? Sometimes we see really large translation memories, and contains a lot of data going back multiple years, right? And it's really hard to understand what's in there, what's good, what's not good, what's being leveraged, what's not being leveraged. So there's a lot of things that we can do at Smartling, but just in general, really what you should be looking for is what content is relevant in your translation memory, what's being leveraged recently. It may not make sense to keep like a really large data set with content from 10 years ago, right? If you're not using it anymore. In addition, what content is good quality, what content maybe has issues that need to be addressed. And so we have some tools that we can use to look at that. Obviously, it's really great to have translators go through and look at that, although, that can be, a time consuming and expensive process. There's a combination of approaches here that allow you to kind of identify, where you may have issues, et cetera. Of course, it goes without saying that, producing translation with like a quality management framework in place really allows you to stay ahead of building up what I would say is sort of like a management deficit in your translation memory, right? Where you're not kind of paying attention to what is getting stored. So there's a few things that go into the management and maintenance and upkeep, but really having some process and having some attention on what's going in there, is a good quality, and then if you have opportunity, or you need to go back, what's the most cost effective way to do that? And there are some options, like I said, using tooling, using some linguists to go back and look at certain kinds of errors, certain kinds of problems. If there's an acute issue that's coming up, obviously that can be kind of targeted, but really you don't want to have no approach here, right? Because at the end of the day, we talked about getting consistency, high quality reuse, and cost savings, right? Those are really the goals. And if you're not getting the consistency and high quality, it kind of degrades the value of the cost savings.
Yeah, that's all great points. It's not just a library where we let dusty books sit in the library. Yeah. We have to go and dust them, get them together for sure. Okay, so let's move on to glossary. Again, we'll kind of cover the same things. What are some approaches or ways to make this process easier? So Andrew, maybe you can share again, what are the goals for glossary? And then Mari can cover kind of what to think about when we are putting together a glossary and maintaining it.
Yeah, Cassie, I think for every customer, when they have an effective glossary, you really are identifying the terms that are important and unique to that customer. Customer in the consumer product space and have a lot different, depending on the industry too, right? A lot different set of terminology than a customer maybe in like the B2B software space. And you want to make sure that the terminology is relevant to the customer's domain, is relevant to that customer's brand, right? And that those terms are kind of set as defaults, right? With translations that are good, that are approved, that really kind of match how the customer wants to communicate those key terms in that local market. And Mari mentioned earlier, sometimes customers come in with glossary that's sentence long segments, and really what we advise is that the glossary is really a subset of your if your translation memory unit, right? It's the key term that's going to be nested inside that string. And what that really kind of allows you to do, if you have good glossary, you're going to be making sure that you have consistency across all languages, right? So that the important terms are getting communicated in all languages. And that sort of approach, it's a little bit programmatic. It requires a little bit of discipline, but if you're staying on top of your glossary, you're going to be making sure that as you generate new content, as you communicate to new markets, that the important terms for your company are getting communicated correctly.
Yeah, I think no, yeah, they're all great points. And the one thing I'd add as well, that in addition to consistency, if you have a good, robust glossary, although it might take some time to prepare at the start, it will actually save you time in the long term. So if you have a lot of terms out there that the linguists are going in and they're like, should I actually translate this or not? And they're needing to ask you, if you can at least add all your do not translate terms at the start, and also your preferred translations, seen as, again, different terms can have different translations. Again, the more you put in there, the less questions you'll be asked. But all to say, can be daunting at the start. It still is a live document, so it's not to worry if your linguists do have those questions. It's great that they care about the quality and they want to make sure they have the right translation, keep it in English when it needs to be kept in English. So you can always update that. So because maintenance is needed, like somebody may be given the task of, can you please create this document? You do need to think of, okay, who's going to maintain it? If you have different project managers, just say for your legal department or your marketing department, or even for your different brands, you might need to make the decision, will we have one master glossary? Or if we have a term that's like relevant for all of our departments, that we can just go in and add it once? Or do we actually need to keep separate glossaries? And if it's a master glossary, you can label it that somebody can go in and filter down. However, if you're saying, no, we have kind of heads of different departments that really don't want to see different terms of different departments, they just want to see their own, you can then have separate, for example, brand specific glossaries where the project manager can go in and they just need to make an update to their own glossary. Again, if there is a term that is relevant across your account, there's kind of some thought need to be put into, okay, I'll need to make sure to update all the project managers that they can then go in and update it. So again, that's really only kind of the decision you need to make at the start. And as I said, it's kind of best to just go in and, as I said, at least start with the do not translate terms, again, the preferred translations, or just the terms that are important or specific to your industry. And then, with your agency, if you're using our Smartling language services, they can go in and they can actually do the preferred translations for you, so they can, translate your glossary. But the one other important thing to add is as much detail as you can give as possible as regards the description, etc. If you are going to use some machine translation or artificial intelligence that you will take into account your glossary, you do also need to be really careful on, what you're marking. So if you mark it as an exact term, that means that it will literally take the term, look at the lowercase, uppercase, and it'll only pick that up if it's exactly the same if you mark that as exact term. So, there is kind of some thought to be put in as well if this will just be used by humans, or if you'll use any MT AI. And again, it's even more important that you think of all the different elements.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting your first point, Mari, around, do you have one glossary or multiple? I think in our State of Translation report from last year, the vast majority of our customers have kind of just done one. But there are, more than zero who have, even as many as 5 to 10. And I assume those are mostly customers that have a variety of different brands that have unique personalities that they need to take into account. But it's definitely interesting to think about. So Andrew, I know Mari touched on this a little bit, but what are some options that we have as far as, I think one, kind of building out the glossary as far, maybe you put your do not translate terms, but you don't have your preferred terms in place. And then how do you maintain it over time?
Yeah, I think that's, it's always something that is worth thinking about in advance of starting translation, right? And planning for before you start translation. Not just from a timing approach, like building in the time to develop and establish a glossary, but also thinking about what the right approach is. And so, depending on how a customer is creating content, right, they may have all of their content ready, before translation starts, and that's really an advantage. and you could use that to, extract terms in bulk, right? But if you don't, you may be creating content as you translate. You may need a slightly different approach, and you may need to have a more organic way to identify and develop glossary as you go. And there may be some need to, do glossary updates during and after translation, right? And so it just really depends on the approach, but having a process and having a thoughtful, deliberate approach to making sure that the glossary is developed is really important. Obviously, customers are going to generate new content, right? And so, as you do that, really looking at, new words, adding glossary terms based on new words is an important part of it. We have tools at Smartling with our language services where we can, look at what terms are unique for a customer, how they're being used for that customer, and then, pull those out in bulk. And, that's something that customers find really valuable. And then also we can help customers look at what terms aren't really relevant. We see a lot of customers with really large glossaries, and only 40 or 30% of the terms are even getting matched at all, right? And that may mean that the terms aren't relevant. Maybe they're not set up the right way, as Murray mentioned. The term needs to be specified in a certain way in the entry. But that's something that we help customers with all the time. In particular, the planning part of starting a glossary.
Great. All right, we're on to our last asset, style guides. So style guides are fun, and I think this is something that we're seeing used more and more, especially with AI and MT in particular. I think it has some unique opportunities. Andrew, maybe you can again share your thoughts on the goals for the style guide, and Mari, you can cover what we should be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. Style guides are slightly different assets than translation memory and glossary. And traditionally, customers will put together a style guide, or a language service provider would do that on behalf of the customer to really give the translator instructions on what the tone of the translation, the style of the translation should be, and then some very specific language conventions, right? It should be formal or informal. How should the translator handle currency? How should the translator handle lists, other things like that, handling tags, for example. So these sorts of instructions are they're still being used today. They're really important. As we kind of move more and more towards AI systems, one of the things that and Mario will probably talk about this a little bit, but one of the things that we want to start thinking about is how does this asset in particular inform not just a translator, but is also structured in a way that an LLM could infer context from. So
yeah, so going to start by saying I know a lot of companies put a lot of money into creating their English content, and they have marketing teams or they use agencies, and they know just how important it is, to get the tone of voice right, etc. A lot of people only speak English and kind of mightn't think too much about the fact that there's a lot of the world out there that English isn't their first language. So you need to think that the style guide is actually really important. It should be as important to us to make sure we have the style and tone of voice right, in our style guide, that the translations will be as good, if not better than the English. So as Andrew said, I think it is really important to kind of note that the idea of this document is that when your translators go in, and they will be trained up on your, on your style, etc. However, just as a reminder to them, what tone of voice that they should have, the different instructions they should follow, but it should be really concise, so that when they go in there, they're reminded of the main points. So, I do have some customers, they might come at the start with a 50-page brand guide. So there might be really important information in there. However, as regards the Pantone color of font won't help the linguist. So you really need to think, okay, again, there might be a lot of important information in there, but we really want this to be helpful to the linguist. So although you can add that as an attachment, and we can go through it with you, it is really important to have that, really concise style guide for the linguists to make their life as easy as possible. So unlike the glossary, where within, Smartling, we call it a project, if you'd like a marketing project, you could have multiple glossaries if you happen to have different brands. When it comes to a style guide, You can only have either a master style guide if you say that one style guide will work for all of our markets. If we're talking about who our audience is, what style do we need to follow? Once that works in all markets, one is sufficient. However, if ever you say, okay, so take for example, Spain and Germany. In Spain, we can have a more informal style. In German, it does need to be more formal. That would be a use case for saying we actually need to have a separate market specific style guide. So when you go in, you'll have a specific style guide for each of the markets. So it is possible just to either have the one master one or the one locales or market specific one. It's obviously not possible, and for the one language to have two style guides where one says to be formal and the other says to be informal. So it's really the decision you need to make. And then the other thing I always like to say is that, or the example I like to give is Jack Weldy, our founder. He always said, he once said in a call, and I thought it was really good. He was like, we could bake you the best cake in the world. But if you don't tell us, what you're allergic to or what flavors you might dislike, it could be the worst cake for you. So it's similar with translations. The more you can tell us about what's important to you, the better we can get the translations, to your liking. And again, it's not to say that like everything might be perfect from the start. Again, it can be overwhelming when you're trying to think of setting up your style guide, glossary, etc. It's a live document. So don't worry if ever you're being asked a question on the style by linguists, that can just to always think, oh, I'm just going to go in there and update my style guide. So, we'll always work on it together to get it as perfect as possible whenever there's any change, to make sure to go in and update it in real time.
Yeah. And Mari's already talking a bit about updates, but Andrew, what are some kind of strategies for upkeeping the style guides?
Yeah, Mari mentioned a few really good points there. I would say this is just slightly different than like your translation memory and your glossary, which probably require a little bit more like proactive management and maybe some systems around managing those assets. With the style guide, it's really making sure that, it's relevant and it continues to stay relevant. Some of the things that could change relevancy, right? If you're adding new languages and you need language specific instructions, you need to factor that in when, making updates to the style guide. And, the other thing is, most customers are not really, I would say, changing their brand voice or changing how they want to communicate, dramatically. It does happen, right? But it's not like every quarter they have a new communications approach, right? As you can probably attest, Cassie, right? But like sometimes that does happen, right? And so a customer wants to go from a formal tone of voice to an informal tone of voice. There's like downstream changes, of course, to other things that they need to manage, right? But in the instructions to the translators, those are things that they need to consider and update. And so, there are changes like that. Some of those are more impactful. Like formality would be pretty impactful and would have like consequences throughout the other through the TM and perhaps the glossary. But there may be other smaller changes, a refinement or something like that based on feedback that comes through in translation. And you may hey, we don't actually want colloquialisms used in our content, and we're seeing some of that, but let's get rid of that. And then that's as an update in the style guide potentially. So, yeah, and a lot of that is going to come up as Mari mentioned, kind of during translation, and some of these changes are really going to be organically driven, but some of these changes may come from pretty deliberate, thoughtful shift on the customer side to communicate differently.
Great. So I know we've kind of been talking about linguistic assets in a bit of a mix of, using them with human translators and then also using them with automated systems. And Andrew, you kind of mentioned at the top that linguistic assets should start being thought about as data inputs for these automated systems. So can you talk a little bit more about what that actually means and if and how it should change how we set up and manage these assets?
Yeah, for sure. And we're kind of in the middle of that transition now, and we I think like as we kind of more and more use AI powered workflows or even machine translation workflows, this becomes really more acute and pressing to have right. So in the past, like, I mentioned, you may have been able to give a translator some instructions in a certain format with certain kind of information. And the translator, would just intuitively understand, the context around those instructions, or they would see, the context of the translations, and they'd be able to kind of figure out what they need to do based on the instructions. That just needs to be uh, specified slightly differently for an AI system. And so that goes to like the kind of instruction as well as how the instruction is really formatted, right? And so, Marty mentioned this a couple times about some of the assets. We see style guides come to us as PowerPoint presentations, dozens of slides, or really large, expansive Word or PDF documents, and that information is really good for like a human translator. Succinct is better for everybody, I think, but really for an AI system, we want to have these inputs really structured as data rather than like information, I would say. And so, in Smartling, we have a couple assets where that information can be structured as data, and every day we're working to continuously leverage the data that is in those assets so that it doesn't inform an LLM. And a good example of this is in our style guides, we have formality as a field, basically an informal, formal toggle that you can select from a dropdown. And that really allows our translations using AI to produce translations in the correct formality as specified by the customer. That's quite different than if you had a brand guide and you had maybe general instruction about tone of voice and things like that, or you maybe had a few pages on tone of voice, and that may be harder for an AI system to process. As we kind of move forward and get better at doing this, the complexity of instructions will improve, of course, and the kinds of instructions we can feed into these systems will improve, of course. But we talked a little bit, even with glossary, about like do not translate, et cetera. Like those sorts of instructions are really critical, because an AI system is not going to intuit that this is a product name necessarily unless you specify do not translate it.
Yeah. So, and the one thing I'm going to add is that there might be some of you out there who, say, I'm just starting, I only want to do a two-step human process. All I would say to you is that although that might be your strategy now, and I know that was the strategy of a lot of our customers a few years back, your strategy can change. So things can happen where you're like, okay, we've no choice but to cut costs regardless, so when it comes to that, although you may think, oh, well, I don't really need to, prepare my style guide or glossary with AI in mind, I would recommend that from the very start, you do think of AI and MT that for the future, so that you're set up that if then you need to change strategy, that it's all ready for you. So again, the prime example, Andrew, that you said, even the smallest thing of marking a term as exact match. Again, when it comes to AI, if it goes in and if the term that you have in your glossary isn't exact, that won't even be picked up as a glossary term. So again, just to save you time in the future, would definitely strongly encourage to think of that when you're creating your glossaries and style guides at the start.
Yeah, great. So, what are some of the ways, maybe, Mari, to your point, like people aren't thinking about how these assets are being used in automated systems. So what are some of the ways that we're already seeing these assets used by our customers in automated systems?
So I think the primary one that comes to mind would be trained engines. So we have a few AI workflows outside of that, but the most basic one, if you decide, okay, so we need to start using MT, or there's some languages that we currently don't have the budget to translate, or some content types that like the quality really isn't important to us, so we want to do raw MT. So there's definitely that option. It's the quickest and cheapest. However, if you have a really good translation memory and you have your style guide and glossary, one thing we would recommend to get even better quality translations is that you can train up your engine. And that basically takes your translation memory, takes your style guide, glossary, etc., and we can train an engine that it'll include your glossary terms, the style of your previous translations, etc. So even if you have that content going through an instantaneous workflow where you can basically have the translation straight away, that if they're trained up with your assets, you'll get much higher quality or translations that are better suited for you.
Andrew, any thoughts on kind of the AI side of things?
Yeah, I agree with everything Mari said. And if you're going to kind of infuse your MT with your previous translations, having good assets in the first place is really important too, right? Yeah, just on the AI piece, I think like one of the great examples like from our AI powered workflows is term insertion. And like we are doing glossary term insertion after we produce a starting translation, right? And with in particular with like the AI only workflows, it's really, really important to have these inputs structured in a way that mitigates the need for a human to review it. And so we talked a couple times about specifying whether it's do not translate or exact match, right? We do some things with respect to LLM-based smoothing to help correct glossary terms that are inserted, but as much correct information or as much relevant information as we can inject into the process upstream really reduces the potential for like a misfire, and then reduces the need for QA and reduces the need for correction, et cetera, and all these kinds of efforts after the fact. So, it's just kind of a different approach, whereas you don't have the human in the loop and the luxury of having somebody kind of be a safety net there. But there are other ways to kind of manage these things that I think we're seeing become more and more important now.
Great. So just one more question from me, and then I'll pass it over to the Q&A. So a reminder, if you do have any Q&A questions for Mari and Andrew, please put that in our tab for Q&A. But the last question is just any final advice for people out there who are thinking about their linguistic asset management, whether they're just getting started or are already experts. So Mari, I'll start with you.
Okay, so I think I've alluded to it on more than one occasion, but I couldn't recommend enough that you do put the time in at the start. So I know, especially when we're onboarding new customers and whether they're new to translation or not, it's a busy time. They've so much to do, but it's trying to explain to those, especially if they are new to translation. I know you think it mightn't be the most important thing right now, but it actually is. And I know it will take some time, but if you go in and, for example, spend time in your glossary now, and make it as robust as possible and add as much information there as possible, you will ultimately get less questions from the linguist, and you'll get better quality translations that suit you best. So again, couldn't recommend enough. Do try to kind of do as much as possible at the start. I know with our customers, we help you as much as possible. Andrew and the team can help you build that glossary if you already have existing translations, etc. So again, putting that time in, it will save you time in the long run. And kind of likewise, when it comes to onboarding, it might be a case of you're just really excited to get those translations started, and we're really excited for you. However, it really is important to just kind of wait that just small amount of time to make sure you have your assets ready. Because if you kind of insist on just need to kick off straight away and you don't have the translations fully ready, you are going to, there's going to be more time needed to then fix the translations. So again, really important, spend that time at the start, have all your assets ready, and then obviously just over time, maintain them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with both of those items. And then, just having some thought towards maintenance and upkeep, right? And so, you don't want to invest all this time up front, get it right, and then, a year later, you built up a kind of a deficit that you need to spend a lot of time and energy on. So, just having some process to do that, working, our language services here at Smartling and our customer success and managed services team, we spend a lot of time working with customers on maintenance and upkeep, and we make recommendations around, what works best for a particular customer and, what they need to do, but putting some thought towards a method essentially to stay on top of assets.
Great. Well, thank you both. We do have a couple questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to pass those over to you, and you guys can do a free-for-all here. But can you and would you upload trademark documents to your glossary for linguists to reference?
I'm not exactly sure what trademark documents is referring to, but we can certainly use a variety of different kinds of reference material or source content to generate glossary terms. And so, if there is terminology around like specific intellectual property or certain, the common example that we have is product names or product descriptions or service names, things like that. Those are really important terms to identify and define, translate, etc. So yeah, I mean any kind of like key source document, right, that would contain the important customer brand terms we would use.
And one thing I may just add, just kind of, when I hear, can you upload translation or trademark documents to your glossary? So we will work with you to be able to obviously import in your glossary that it can be used in Smartling. So there is a particular template that you can go in and just say you have one new do not translate term. And you can go in the platform and you can just add that and add all the details around it. Or you can extract the entire document and bulk, add entries and then import that back in. However, we understand that some customers come and they have a glossary in another way, but like, don't worry, we will work with you to get it in the format then that you can import it into Smartling.
Great. Someone had a question around what's the best way to feed previously translated materials into the translation memory? Maybe you don't have a translation memory, but you have previously translated materials. How would that need to be formatted, and would we recommend doing that?
Yep. So Andrew, will I take that? So basically, once it's key based. So first, if you already have an existing translation memory, if it was done by another agency, generally they should have a translation memory, and that is your property. So we can just import that in. Then otherwise, once the document is key based, so i.e. that you have a document that's able to say, okay, this source is equal to this target, and then we can just upload the document and then we can import in the translations, and that can import directly into the translation memory. If, for example, you come with a Word document, 2 Word documents, one in English, one in French, although you may say it is the same, it's not key based, and it's, and it's just looking at paragraphs. But if you come with one like that, we still can discuss if there's some way that we can get that in for you. The majority of document types out there are key based, and it's rare that somebody would come and kind of have them in Word documents. But all to say, regardless of how you have translations now, please let us know, because we obviously want you to, want to help you get that in to be able to leverage your previous translations.
So Mari, would you say kind of the most common key-based type would be like a Sheets or Excel or something like that, where you can have a one-for-one comparison?
Exactly. That might be a case of, generally I'm like, well, where do these translations come from? You don't want somebody to have to copy and paste in. So we'll always ask, where do these translations live now? As we do whenever any copy is uploaded or ingested in Smartling. Passionate about asking, where's that coming from, to see, can we automate things? Always thinking about making your life as easy as possible, basically.
Yeah. Someone asked, could you provide an example of, or the requirements for an MT compatible style guide?
Yeah, I believe we have in our help center. You can download the template from our help center if you search style guide. And just that style guide, I think, is we'll see that change by throughout the course of the year into something that's really optimized for use with AI. And so that's something that we're in the process of developing now. So if you need it for right now, you can download it, and it has, I think formality is really the key thing in there that we're looking at. And there may be a couple other fields in there that we're looking at using some of the AI and automation, but we're going to have a fully optimized AI style guide by the end of the year.
Awesome. And yeah, I'll pop that Help Center link in for you guys on Style Guide there. An interesting question here, where do SEO keywords fall as an asset? Is there any specific place in Smartling where linguists can have easy access to those while translating?
Yeah, Andrew. Well, I can start by saying in your glossary there is the option to mark a term as SEO compatible. But after that, I know that it's something that Andrew and our Smartling language services team can help with. So Andrew, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. So the glossary, fully supports SEO keywords. And you can set up a separate glossary for SEO if you want, and just depends on what your approach is in translation to leveraging those SEO keywords. That's something that is a little bit different for every customer. It depends a little bit on how the translations are coming into Smartling from a technical perspective, but that's something we can work with you on. One of the main things, and we talk a lot about planning, for glossary planning for a style guide. If you're doing SEO, even more important, it's another layer that needs to be factored in before you start translation. What is going to be your approach to incorporating these SEO keywords into your translation beyond just like the normal glossary terminology?
Great. And last question. Thanks so much for all the questions, everyone. I like it. Putting Mari and Andrew on their toes here. This one's kind of an existential one. In the age of AI-assisted translation, how do you see the role of traditional localization assets like style guides and glossaries evolving? What strategies should be employed to ensure these remain relevant and effective to both translators and AI?
Yeah, we talked about this, a little bit. But I think just understanding, really, what these systems are looking for. So a good example of that is, we use in our AI post editing step, we use an LLM to adjust formality, right? And so if you don't have formality specified in your style guide, you're not going to get the benefit of that specification in your translation. And so if you're doing AI only translation, that may result in a mix of different kinds of formality coming through the machine translation. So really just understanding what the input requirements are, making sure that those are in place in your assets and that they're in a format that is essentially readable, right? And that's something that when you come work with us at Smartling, we're going to help you set up. We're going to help you think through, and we're going to help you manage essentially. So, talking generally though, that's how I would think about that.
Yeah. And I think just I may add, because there's so many exciting things happening, when it comes to AI, and I know we have an amazing team that basically testing the whole time, LLMs, etc. So many things happen. There's so many updates. So even if there isn't something that our assets are used for right now, to think it is getting better and better every day. So even, whereas in the past, when we took a glossary term, we basically just said, okay, this term has come up. We're just going to just overlay it with your glossary term. Now we can have LLMs come in and basically say, okay, what tense is that in? So it can do amazing things. It can take a fuzzy match from your translation memory, and it can actually improve that match. So all to say is, one, it's amazing if you have a really good translation memory, glossary, style guide, that'll definitely help the quality of your translations. But I just think it's amazing now what AI is able to do to leverage each of those assets as much as possible, and to even improve upon them, and allow you to get better leverage, better quality, etc. So it's amazing what's happening, and I think keep watching this space.
Yeah. And I think also, let us do the hard work for you as well. As Andrew said, we're putting together a template for AI style guides that is based on, hours and hours of research from our R&D team. We put together MT optimized translation memory that automatically lets you know if that term is optimized for MT to use or not. These are things that you certainly could do yourself, but it would be challenging. So I would say, even if you're not working with Smartling, rely on your provider to kind of do some of that heavy lifting for you and advise you based on the research that they're doing in this space.
Yeah, that's a great point, Cassie. And we have customers that we work with all the time who, they look at, whether or not it would be effective for them to go and, produce, AI translations on their own and kind of manage that on their own. And then, they always kind of bump into this problem that you described, which is, how do they optimize, how do they do it at scale really well? How do they ensure the right outcomes? And that's really kind of like what we're trying to do at Smartling for customers. I think the core value here is, not the production of automated translation, but making sure you get the most value out of that, right?
Yep. Awesome. Thank you guys, both Mari and Andrew, and the audience for great questions. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. And that's the end of our Back to Basics series, but definitely do not miss our Global Ready Conference, which will be at the end of April. That's kind of like a full half-day event where we'll have, I think, 12 to 14 sessions talking about all kinds of things, including linguistic assets and quality and AI. So definitely don't miss that, and we hope to see you there. So thanks everyone for joining.